My next assertion is that Jesus never claimed to be God. So, talk to me. Where does Jesus claim to be God?
Well, Fan is going to get up here later, but he's going to run out of time. So I made a video about some identifying terms that Jesus is called. Why does Jesus always call himself the Son of Man? And what does the title Son of Man actually mean? Was it a title that connotes humanity and humility? Or does it mean more? It might mean the exact opposite of what we were taught it was. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man about 80 times in the New Testament. It's his favorite name for himself. Growing up knowing that Jesus has a dual nature, being 100% man and 100% God, oh, that is not an easy Venn diagram to make. I always thought that when people called him Son of God, they were talking about his nature as God. But when he called himself Son of Man, it was referring to his nature as a human. But what if I had it all wrong? Let's put on our detective caps and see if we can't get to the bottom of this. Let's look at the title that assumedly emphasizes Jesus' deity. Say that 10 times fast. Jesus is called the Son of God by angels, demons, disciples, Romans, people after his death and resurrection, and even God the Father himself. To be good readers of the word, we have to understand what a person in that place and time would mean when they said Son of God. So where do we start? I always like to look backward and see if a word or phrase is used before where I find it. And wouldn't you know it, we find a few relevant people being called sons of God. Jesus comes from the line of David, as promised, and his ancestors were called sons of God. Here's a few examples of Solomon being called the Son of God. Psalm 2, written by David, has the Lord saying to him that he is a son of God. Psalm 89, written for David by a man named Ethan, refers to David as the firstborn, referring to David being a higher than all else son. So we see multiple times that Jesus' kingly ancestors are called sons of God. And it wasn't because of their DNA. It was because of the unusually close bond between earthly, entirely human kings and the God of the universe. The king is not divine, but is appointed by God and given special attention, wisdom, and protection. So what does that mean about people in Jesus' day who called him Son of God? In the first century, the Jewish people were living under the Roman Empire, greatly awaiting a king of their own.
I'm waiting!
When they called Jesus the Son of God, they were thinking back to David and Solomon, hoping and praying that Jesus was the long-awaited, human, Davidic king who would restore them as a great nation. They weren't thinking of this title as a title of divinity at that point, but a title of lineage to the great kings of old. So where does this leave us? I thought Jesus was God. So what does that mean if Son of God doesn't entirely connotate him being God? Oh no! What are we gonna do? Okay, get a hold of yourself. We're not done yet. Jesus refers to himself as many things. Bread of life, light of the world, a few times as the Son of God, but roughly 85% of the time, Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. These would have been his preferred Instagram pronouns. So where did he get this title from? What would have people thought when they heard him say this? The most prominent use of the term Son of Man is found in Daniel 7. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. We see this one who is like a son of man, and the word like connotes similar, but not entirely the same. Earlier in the book, Daniel talks about things like a lion, like a bear, like a leopard.
Oh my!
Which means that these things are similar to those beasts, but not entirely the same. And this one who is like a son of man, described here, is given authority and glory and a kingdom over all else, like never before. This is no ordinary man being described here. This Son of Man from Daniel clearly has divine attributes that no other man or even king can claim. I would venture to say that by the first century, when people heard Son of Man, they thought of the divine, who looked like a man appearing on the clouds. And we know that some people had a problem with this. Mark 14:61 shows Jesus being questioned by the high priest, saying, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus drops a complete truth bomb on him, even though he
Can't handle the truth!
saying, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." That is not a thing a mere human can claim. So the high priest tore his robes and said,
"Blasphemer!"
The priests that were judging Jesus knew that this was a divine claim that no ordinary son of man could make. Only the one who was like a son of man could make it. Let's take a quick break and see how Than explained this to Alex on Jubilee.
In Daniel 7, you'll see a messianic passage there about how God will come down, and you'll see the Son of Man come, riding in the clouds of heaven, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom.
Do you think Daniel thought that the Son of Man was going to be God, since he says that he's riding on a cloud?
This is a really interesting point.
I don't think that he did, because he was a Jewish writer.
I lean on saying yes. Psalm 104 is like an exaltation psalm and actually talks about Yahweh being the one that rides the clouds in heaven. He is the king. I see that as kind of a polemic of calling Yahweh the king over Baal. Jesus before Caiaphas in Mark's gospel, Caiaphas asks him, "Who are you?" And instead of just explicitly saying, "I am God," Jesus quotes Daniel 7, saying he is the Son of Man, the human one, who will ride on the clouds and calls himself the second power. So you have this two powers in heaven motif. The two powers, they're both God. and the cloud rider motif and the Son of Man. He's quoting Daniel 7 to identify himself. After that, Caiaphas tears his robe and cries
Yes.
blasphemy.
And then the clock pretty much ran out as they tried to get their last points in. I have no idea why anyone was putting their flags up, because Than was killing it. So much so that I'd love to invite him to be a guest on our future Kinks Cultural podcast, but you didn't hear that from me. Anyway, back to the video. So we really see that the title Son of Man refers to Jesus' nature as God. So maybe now you're asking yourself, why does this matter? I mean, we still have two common terms for Jesus that refer to his deity and his humanity. So what if they were flipped a little? I think this matters for a huge reason, though. You see, there's a growing movement out there of people called unitarians. They believe that Jesus is Messiah, but deny that he is God. They have ways that they'll interpret the scripture that allow for their heresies. I mean, Jesus never explicitly calls himself God, right?
False.
When we realize that we flipped the understanding of these terms, I think we find something incredible. We find that when people were referring to Jesus as the Son of God, they were referring to him as a son of David, an earthly king. They wanted something from him. They wanted freedom, as they understood it. But when you realize that Jesus was constantly calling himself Son of Man, and that Son of Man is a term of deity, we find the truth. Jesus has been calling himself God this whole time. It was right under our noses. We need to know these things to combat bad teaching and bad theology, not just to puff ourselves up with knowledge, but so that we worship our God correctly, knowing who he is. And we know when we worship Jesus, we are worshiping the Messiah, the Son of God, and most incredibly, the Son of Man. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, you might be interested in my other videos, so please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on that notification bell if you're interested in exploring culture from a biblical perspective. And if you have any other thoughts or ideas for a future video, please leave it down in the comments section below.
This is the end of the mystery. Well, well.